Hello. We're going to try and make this texture and then make it into a material and bring it into Unreal 4. So we're going to start obviously in Photoshop and then import it into Unreal 4 with the correct settings all in place. Okay, so what you'll need to do is go to File, New, and make a document that's 1024 pixels square. So 1024 in width and height. So this is one of the first elements for suitability for Unreal, this is a power of 2 number, which means it's not just a multiple of 2, it's what happens if you double 2 to a certain number of stages. And so it's a power of 2. Okay, so the name for it is Dust or Sand, or Dusty Sand. And another thing about the name for suitability for Unreal is it can't have any non-alphanumeric characters in it. So you do things like make a capital letter to replace a space, or you can use underscore, but that's it. Resolution should be 72 pixels per inch. Okay, and we are in RGB colour, red, green and blue colour, and this setting means it's the amount of bits of memory which is employed for each of the red, green and blue channels of colour. A little bit more of that later, but don't worry about it at this point. We can always fix it later if it's wrong. Okay, so here's our new empty image. Now I'm operating from some instructions which I'm just going to show you. There we go. So this is the text instructions to follow in terms of recreating what goes on here, just in case you can't see some of the settings or you kind of remember the process but just want to concentrate just on the settings. Anyway, so we need to go straight to filter, and we're going to use 3 different filters before coming back to review what's gone on. Okay, so back to Photoshop, and just going to come out of crop mode and just find anything else. There we are. Okay, so black background or white background doesn't really matter. Once you go for the filter, render, difference clouds, you can see kind of it's not really bothered about what your colours are. So that all seems very simple and quick and easy. And one thing it's worth noting is if you look at the opposite edges, so if I look here and then go down to the corresponding place on the opposite edge, you'll see replication of tones. What this means is anywhere else you look, go again, you can see it's the same. This tiny little blob of black here replicated down there. This is automatically seamless. Now what we're going to do is make a few changes to this which will just interrupt that seamlessness, which we're going to have to then fix at a later point. So rather than building new single layer content every time I use a filter, I'm going to start duplicating stuff so I can go back and compare and contrast, but also go back to a previous stage if things go all wrong. Okay, so having done the filter render clouds, we're back to the filters again, and we're going to filter, noise, add noise. And the setting, in the instructions it says about 7, 12.5 isn't bad either. I mean, it's just sort of something you can tweak and go back and redo. Distribution uniform and monochromatic. and OK that. OK, so you might see there's a minimal difference. If I just click between the two, there's just a little bit more grain in it now. OK, duplicate again. If you want to, you can go through and name these, but for speed I'm avoiding that. I'm just going to have to check to see what my next filter is. It's brushstrokes, ink, outlines. OK. So now your setup might be slightly different depending on your version of Photoshop. But anyway, I find to go straight to the filter gallery, and mine just happens to be set for brushstrokes, ink, outlines. And we've got a stroke length of 18 and dark and light intensity of 10 and 5, and that's pretty much right. You should get this sort of slightly blotted effect, a bit like what happens if you put white paper on some oily water. OK, that. And there we are. So we've started to break up the appearance of the alternate black and white. So there's a bit of specular white in the black bits and a bit of specular dark in the white bits. So it's not quite so flattened over. And if we compare and contrast with the original, it's got a lot more scratchy looking, which is just what we want. Okay, another duplicate. Okay, so we've got these things down. Now we're to filter, stylize, emboss. Filter, stylize, emboss. With this one, you can play around with the settings a bit. The reason for the angle of 135, that gives you an angle of light effect that's halfway between horizontal and vertical, which makes quite a good effect for a process that we've got coming up right at the end of the tutorial. Okay, now you can tweak the amount just to get something really quite contrasty, but this setting of about somewhere between 50 and 75 is quite good. You get quite a good variation, and you get that effect where there's some kind of coarser grit here and something really quite smooth and soft looking there, which is about right. When it comes to making it seamless, you don't want to have too much of this hard effect where overlays and brush edge work will start to show up. Okay, well, you might say at that point we're done, and we sort of are, but the next thing to do is the what you might call the artwork. So this is the bit where we sort of check up and fix the seamlessness. So we go filter, other, offset. Now this one is set up so that it's exactly halfway along our 1024 sides, which isn't necessary in the first instance, but if you had a texture you needed to offset back again, so that when you offset the edges in, as we're about to do here, like that, now you can just see middle line going down there. We can see how it would start to look like tiles rather than dirt. So we'll need to stamp those out, which is quite a good way of referring to the clone stamp tool. Maybe I need to make a duplicate of this. And then to be able to compare and contrast. So And now I'm going to go to the clone stamp tool, which is C on your keyboard, I think. Oh no, S for stamp. There you go, S for stamp. And what you also want to do is maybe have a look at different sorts of brushes that have really fuzzed edges, or what's called a good proportion of fall off, so that the edge of the brush is quite softened. Whatever happens, you should look for something maybe a bit chalky, or a bit like charcoal, or thick crayon, something quite dry and grainy looking, like the sand that you're trying to replicate or replace. I'm going to give that one a go. Not too bad. It's a little bit small. It could do with growing somewhat, because we haven't got all day. Okay, so now clone stamp tool. So I'm going to get my sample bit, and obviously you're looking for the type of area that replicates the one you're trying to paint over. Okay, so there's my sample, and now I'm just going to, oh yep, something's gone wrong there. Back to that point. Okay, maybe there's a better brush I can choose. Let's have a look at the brushes palette, brush presets. Yeah, there we go. So something like that will be quite good, I think. Oh no, it's worth getting them over the canvas to see what it looks like. So try and size that one up. Oh yeah, that might be quite good. So I'll go back to my clone stamp. That's better. Okay, so just a bit of cover up, and don't forget to go back to your sampling. I can never remember whether I've got the aligned on or not, and consequently I end up forgetting what it does. Okay, you want to paint almost up to the new edge, but not quite. Yeah, get as close as you can. But if you get too close there, of course, you're going to make it not match up to the other side. Okay, so if I de-offset that, that should be a lot better. And if I de-offset it, it won't make any difference, because already the bits from the middle are going to join up with the bits at the edge. Sorry, the bits that were in the middle are now at the edge, and they're going to join up and wrap around seamlessly. So goes the theory. Quick look at the instructions again. Okay, so now you can choose to add some sort of colour. So image adjustments, hue, saturation, and make it a bit sandy. This isn't strictly necessary, but it's worthwhile. Just maybe just to know that that's what you can do if you've got one kind of specific use for this, but obviously the technique can work with any number of different colours on, some of which could be supplied by messing around in Unreal's materials. Okay, so let's go image adjustments, hue saturation, and something like 40, and then lightness by, and just bring the saturation up. Take saturation down. I really should look at my settings, but I'm using a little bit of memory. Don't forget to do the colorize, that's the thing that I was initially foxed by. And there's something a bit sort of sand and dust coloured. Okay, at this point then it's ready to be exported. What you could do, however, is duplicate a layer. If you haven't duplicated layers yet, that's okay, but at this point, once you make a normal map, there's no way back, so that's what would be a good idea to do. Now you're going to make a normal map probably with the normal mapper in your version of Photoshop, which is under the 3D menu. Now my 3D menu is under filter. Sorry, your 3D menu is under filter. So you'll be looking under filter, and then somewhere down here, about there, will be 3D, and hanging off the 3D one, it will say normal map, and you'll do it that way. I'm using this thing, which you can still add to Photoshop, but it requires another bit of software which is free, and it's a step you don't really need to take at the minute. Okay, so these settings are sort of as tried and tested. And there we are. Okay, so that will do us for the Photoshop bit, and so we're just going to hop now into Unreal. Now we're in Unreal, and I've got the content examples project open, and I've preset a couple of filters, one for material, one for texture, so I can see a whole raft of stuff that I could use, could borrow to show a few things about materials and textures in Unreal. So if that was a bit fast. One of the things you'll notice is that quite often a material like this one, for instance, it has, or a texture I should say, there's the standard usable texture, and this one is a raindrop splash, which you could use in a number of different circumstances and set different kind of color cast to it, as well as other effects. And it has a corresponding texture that often has normal, as in this teardrop one, T raindrop, and then T raindrop normal. And it might just have, like this one, example asset underscore N. And this kind of pale purpley colour effect. This is sort of part of the way normal maps work, and without going into a whole load of detail, it's important that that sort of colour relationship is there in the normal map for it to work in any sense. Whether it does what you intend, that's a different matter. But anyway, so a normal map, well, a normal map, as you might suggest, is it tells you something about the surface with the map image or texture on it. And most of the things it tells you are to do with the angle of the pixels that are in the normal map. So this is almost like an extra bit of rough surface that's added to a material, which means that on any surface of any object with that normal map displaying, you get a bit of extra texture out of it. So we just did a normal map on sand texture. So let's see about getting that texture, the sand and its normal map, into Unreal. What I'm going to do is take you through the steps to save and import at the same time. So there's a fair amount of value in this tutorial. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Photoshop and save out the images. Effectively, we've got two images then to save out from this file. It's got a good name, no spaces in it, no non-alphanumeric characters, plus it's a power of 2 dimensions, so 1024, and the last thing it needs to have is one of 3 file types. Now sometimes you'll find that an image that doesn't have all these 3 things in it, so name, dimensions in pixels, and file type, gets into Unreal, but then you find you can't actually use it on any surfaces. Okay, so we're going to go for File, Save As. So we're actually saving out the normal map first. You've got 3 types, 3 file types. You've got BMP, TGA, and PNG. There it is. All 3 are as good as each other, roughly speaking. They all produce fairly large files. PNG has some sort of built-in transparency effect, which the other 2 sort of require a little bit of extra setup to achieve. The one I usually choose BMP purely because the thumbnails for the image, the icons for it, show up in Windows Explorer, so it's good for presentation purposes. So I'm going to call this Dusty Sand. Actually, rather than save it into a kind of standard working folder, I'm going to go straight into my Unreal projects, into my content examples, into the content, into the content folder of any project that you want to use it in, and just bung it straight there. That means it's really easy to find. When I was talking before about bit depth and 8 bits per channel, well, we've got 3 channels, red, green and blue. 8 bits times 3 gives you 24-bit. So slightly confusing way of referring to the different setups there, but it's alright in the end. Okay, so that's the normal map, which I probably didn't name properly to enforce it as a normal map, but anyway. Right, I'm just going to turn that one off, and we're going to save this one out now as a texture too. The file, save as, again BMP, and it's going to call it Dusty Sand again. I should see the existing one, there it is. So I'm going to call this one just Dusty Sand, like that. Okay, now we're good to go. What I'm going to do actually before we import is I'm going to find that folder and just rename that image. Always a relief to find something where you hoped it is. So yeah, you're allowed an underscore, and I use N to show that it's a normal map. Okay, so now it's ready to come into Unreal. So because I'm there looking at the image files, what I'm going to do is just drag and drop. So back to Explorer, grab these two, and I'm going to drop them into any textures folder that I can see. Just giving me a little indicator, and there they are. Dusty Sand and Dusty Sand N. Now sometimes it's not always easy to tell how good your importing is. So it's worthwhile doing a check on normal maps. Actually, I was going to double click and have a look at the texture, but I don't need to. I've got here the tool tip hanging off, or right click context, and I can see that the compression settings near the bottom says normal map. So that's bingo, bang on. And then compression settings are default for that one. So I know these are going to work great as a texture. In a material. Now rather than make a material by this method, so I can do right click and do create basic asset material. I can go one better, right click, color texture, and then do create material like that, and it gives you a bit of a naming continuation, Dusty Sand, and it tells you that it's got a bit of material identity to it by putting matte at the end. So I'll accept that and double click and see what we got. I'm just waiting for this to paint up. Maybe I won't wait. Okay, so what you put a texture in is called a texture sample. So if you don't have one ready to hand that you want to use, so I could duplicate this by doing right click, duplicate, or I could hold down the T key on the keyboard and left click once, and that's a lot more convenient. Now I'm not quite sure what it's going to populate with. I was going to populate with nothing in that one at the minute. I'm just going to join it up to normal, just to remind me that we need a normal texture in here. And the great thing about this is that by default it lets you very quickly see any texture in the project, and it makes you search through those as well. So I'm looking for anything that starts with DUS, and there's my Dusty Sand normal map. Okay, and just wait for that to preview. Okay, so what's the difference between that and without the normal map? Okay, well I'm just going to spin around that a bit. Let's just disconnect the normal map. Wait for a moment till it works it out. And you can see the highlight is just spreading over all the bits that should be just a little bit dark and textured looking. So just not, hasn't got much in the way of depth or texture. I put that back on. Okay, so at the same angle you're getting a lot more of the texture showing through. What we can do, of course, is replace the base colour with a non-texture. So rather than a whole set of colours from the texture and all the file size that indicates, let's just use a 3-value colour, an RGB setting. So what I'm after here is a constant 3 vector. The term vector is probably better replaceable with the word value. So we've got 3 values into this, and we're dealing with RGB, so we're going to have a bit of blue, a bit of green, and quite a bit of red. And this is the colour I'm looking at here. It's not quite there yet, but it's not far off, if I say so myself. So if I added a bit more blue in there, that should just tone it down a bit. So with a normal map you get texture, and you get versatility, because really this colour can be changed to anything, but I can reuse this normal map for all sorts of different things. So for instance, it works quite well as a sort of used leather, worn leather effect. It would be good for certain types of fabric, distant dust, grime, all sorts of potential uses. And that's just one texture. I just need to change whatever colours. I can also add things into, say, the settings for roughness, and if I use a constant there, so this is one value, if I use a constant value of 0, I'm really nailing in that there should be no roughness, so it should be, so it's now sparkling because it's a little bit not very credibly smooth. So let's try 0.25. Values between 0 and 1 are used in the material editor. Okay, so that's a little bit better, a little bit over shiny still. Let's go too far the other way and go 0.75 of roughness. And that should really help it kind of look like sandy grit. Maybe a little bit too dull there. Okay, so if I save that, the little asterisk should go. And these asterisks here tell us that these two need saving, so Control key to save to select one at a time and make them save. And this is now material that's deployable. What I need to do is find something to throw it onto. And spoil Epic Games' hard work. So there's nothing here that's going to very quickly and easily take a new texture, I think. Let's try that. Oh, there we go, look, so we've got a material there we could change. What's it called? Oh, dusty something, isn't it? Dust. Dusty sand mat. Oh, there we go. Oh, interestingly enough, there's another texture, another material on here somewhere, I think. Oh no, it's just a modelled object. Ooh, that's looking quite nice now. You might say as good as the original. Okay, so that's enough for now. I hope this was useful. More to come.